Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. So as you can see, I'm not in the flat at the moment. I'm actually back at my mum's house for Christmas, which I'm so excited for. I'm so happy to be here. Yes, I am wearing a Christmas jumper. I'm very excited. And my nails are very Christmassy. So today I'm going to be doing a pretty fun video. I'm going to be telling you about my worst books of 2018. And in my next video, I'll be telling you about all my best books of 2018. So it's pretty obvious why it's fun to film your best books or favourite books of the year, because that's pretty self-explanatory. But I weirdly love reflecting on my worst reads of the year as well. I just think it's really interesting to think about what I really love in books and what I really hate in books, and what's really important to me that it's done well in books and what really pisses me off if it's done badly. So I didn't read anything completely shit this year. I didn't have any one-star reads or anything that was completely irredeemable. But that being said, there were definitely some books I really disliked this year. So in no particular order, the first book that I'm going to be talking about in this video is a poetry collection, and that is Wild Embers by Nikita Gill. This is a contemporary feminist poetry collection, and it's probably the worst poetry collection I've ever read. So to make it clear before I start, this isn't me slamming this type of poetry at all. Instagram poetry, I think some people call it. I've read a few collections in the same kind of genre as this, and I've really enjoyed them. I think this style of poetry definitely has a place in literature today. I think it is brilliant in many ways, not least because it gets so many people reading poetry who wouldn't read poetry before. But this particular poetry collection just wasn't done very well, I don't think. It explored a lot of really good themes, which I love, like feminism and feminine empowerment and personal growth. And it definitely said a lot of things that were true, but that doesn't make a good poetry collection. The poetry in this collection is so simple and so accessible that there was just nothing for me to get my teeth stuck into. The language use and the meaning in the poetry was so surface level that it was boring and almost insulting. I just felt like this poetry collection kind of jumped on the bandwagon that Rupi Kaur created, that Amanda Lovelace created, but it wasn't done very well. This was just poor. There was nothing clever about this collection. There was nothing unique about it, and I wouldn't recommend it to anyone. Even if you enjoy this style of poetry, just pass on this one. So the next book that I'm going to talk about is a novel, and that is The Water Cure by Sophie Mackintosh. And this one was a huge surprise for me. I never thought that a book that made the Man Booker long list, which is a prize I love, would make it onto my worst books of the year list. But this book was just pretty rubbish. So this book has a pretty standard feminist dystopian premise. There's a seemingly dystopian world, and the girls in it are oppressed and abused and secluded from the rest of society. Why is this all going on? The frustrating thing about this novel is that it just didn't go beyond any of that basic stuff. So the characterization in this novel was so weak. The girls could have been just anyone, and to be honest, I don't really remember anything about them now. The plot was also so weak. Sophie Mackintosh just didn't do anything with the world she'd created, and the big reveal that happened at the end, or what was meant to be the big reveal, was honestly one of the most anticlimactic things I think I've ever read. So much of this novel was so obvious and so placed. Readers are not stupid in a world where all of the women are endlessly abused and all of the men are pricks. You don't need to call the father figure king to let the readers know that the men have the power. To be fair to the book, the writing wasn't terrible, and some of the moments in here were quite nice, and I felt the way that it handled mental illness and self-harm in particular was really good, and it did give a really good insight into the girls' minds. But this was meant to be a feminist novel, and I just didn't find it to be feminist at all. There was nothing interesting here, there was no interesting insight, there was nothing empowering about this novel, and you can't just make all of the men pricks in a novel for no reason and call that feminist. Combine all that with bad characters, bad plot, and treating your reader like an idiot. just no. So the next book that I'm going to talk about is a classic, and it is very well loved, so I'm sorry, and that is Wuthering Heights by Emily Bronte. So we don't need to spend that long on this one, I don't think. I'm not here to claim that Emily Bronte is a bad writer. She's not. And I'm not here to claim that there isn't anything clever or well done in this novel, because there is. I just didn't like it, and that's why it's on this list. So it is quite a surprise that this novel is on this list, because it's not that I don't love Victorian literature generally, I really do. If you've been watching my videos for any amount of time, you probably know that I absolutely love Austen, I love Charlotte Bronte, I love Dickens. But I just really didn't like this one. This one did not gel with me, even though the writing style and the time setting and everything were massive ticks for me. I think more than anything, I just really hated the characters in this novel, and that stopped me being able to enjoy it at all, really. So it's about a love story between Catherine and Heathcliff, and all the characters, including these two, are all just terrible, terrible people who are all so abusive to one another. And that just really frustrated and kind of upset the hell out of me while I was reading. And I get that there are probably reasons for this, and I get that the eerie and dark kind of atmosphere of the Yorkshire moors reflects the state of the characters, blah, blah, blah. But I just didn't really enjoy this book, clearly. I didn't like the reading experience, I didn't like the characters, and I felt like I didn't like them to no end, like I didn't learn anything from them, and I just found that really frustrating. And I kind of found the plot boring as well, so not for me, worst classic that I've read in a long time. The next book that I'm going to talk about is a historical novel, and that is A Boy in Winter by Rachel Seifert. So this one was really a shame that it made it onto this list, because I buddy read it with my friends Renee and Laura, and we were all really excited for it because it did make the Women's Prize long list this year. So we had really high expectations, and basically none of us liked it. Unlike some of the other books on this list, this isn't here because it was necessarily the worst thing I read all year, but it was just so disappointing that it really sticks out in my mind, and I needed to include it. So this is a historical novel focusing in on a small Ukrainian town during World War II as the SS takes over. It's told through multiple perspectives, and it takes place over only 3 days. So the premise and the setup for this novel sounded so good to me, and that made it even worse when I didn't like it. I really like focusing in on a really small time frame so you can get into the nitty-gritty details of what's happening and the way that the characters experience things. And I also really like that it's a new perspective for me in terms of World War II novels. But I just felt let down by this novel at every turn, basically. The writing style to begin with was so plain. Like, it was kind of strange how plain it was, and I remember it really striking me when I started reading it, and Renee said a really similar thing, that it was almost distracting how simple the writing was. The characters in this novel were also really badly drawn. I just couldn't connect with them or really care about them that much because of how unbelievable I found them, and that really ruins the novel, especially at the end, where there was definitely meant to be this big climax where you got really emotional. I think that's probably what Seifert was anticipating, but I just couldn't care because I didn't care about the characters that much, and that was really disappointing. So this book was kind of good in some ways, but it was terrible in many, and it was just a really sad reading experience. I was really disappointed. I wouldn't recommend this at all. If you're looking for a World War II novel, then I'm sure there are hundreds of better ones out there than this. And the final book that I'm going to talk about today is The Catcher in the Rye by J.D. Salinger. This was another buddy read I did. I did this one with my friend Kelly over at Books I'm Not Reading, and it's another classic that I didn't really like. So this book tells the story of Holden Caulfield, who is a teenage boy in the 1950s, and throughout the story Holden tells us about his recent time at boarding school. And at the end of the book, we get to learn about the situation that Holden is in today. So I will say from the start that there was one aspect of this book that I really did like, and that was Holden's relationship with his sister Phoebe. Phoebe was by far my favourite character in this novel, and I found their sibling relationship to be very well drawn. It was very believable and very touching. But basically everything else about this novel I really, really hated. And the more I think about it, the more I realise that I really, really did dislike like this novel. So I found Holden to be one of the most unbelievable and irritating protagonists I have ever read from the perspective of. He has this really distinct voice throughout the novel that is so unrealistic and just came across so forced to me. He has these taglines that he says all the way through the novel, over and over and over again. And I remember reading it and thinking, did J.D. Salinger really think he could just create these taglines and make Holden say them over and over and over again, and then suddenly he'd be this really unique and consistent and believable character? Because that definitely didn't work. So much of this book was just ridiculous to me, and I do have to say that at times I felt the author and the protagonist came across as quite pretentious, which was gross. So yeah, I just really didn't like this book. The character irritated me way too much, and nothing else really happened in terms of the plot. It was way more focused on Holden as a character and his coming of age and that kind of thing. I will say that Kelly and I did have similar reading experiences of this novel, so that was quite nice to know that I wasn't completely on my own. She didn't dislike it quite as much as maybe I'm making out that I did in this video. I wouldn't hold her to that, but it was nice to know that we were generally on the same page. So yeah, not for me. So yes, that was it. Those were the books that I disliked the most that I read this year. They were my worst reads of 2018. I do hope that if you love any of these books, you're not offended. Obviously, I'm not saying any of this is objective, and I'm not saying that other people can't like these books. I just didn't like my reading experiences of them at all, basically. I'd love to know what you thought of any of these books, if you've read them, if we had the same opinions or if we had wildly different opinions. I would love to know and chat to you about them below. And I would also love to know what your worst read of 2018 was. What did you really, really hate? So thank you so much for watching this video, everyone. It was quite fun to kind of let out my slightly more cynical and sassy side about these books. It was quite fun, and my next video will of course be much more positive and lovely and happy and upbeat, because I'll be talking about my favourite books of the year, so look forward to that. Thank you again, everyone. I hope you're all well, and Merry Christmas. Bye guys.